starting. And for a moment, let me just see him as he's coming on to be with us, to be among us. Sounds very Christian, doesn't it? To be among us. Can you hear me all right? Or is there a problem with the sound?
Je pourrais, mais est-ce que je vais essayer?
Is there a problem with the sound, Sandra? I'm hearing you speak. Is there a problem with the sound?
No, it's okay. We have with the gallery, but it's okay.
Because we are going to be recording, and so we need to be able to hear what we are recording. And Reverend has been so faithful and loyal to us all through the COVID period and leading us into this present day, which is a blessing to have him with us for this Sunday and for next Sunday. So, James, we are all gratefully being with you in attendance. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a delight to be with the good Unity folks of Montreal. And today I want to begin with a time of meditation, and then we'll go into the lesson. So can you all hear me? Does this sound good? Okay. All right then. Will everyone get comfortable in a position that you feel is appropriate for prayer and meditation? And it's helpful to begin this time with an awareness of our breathing. Allow ourselves to relax and become open and receptive to the divine presence. As we feel our breath, we are feeling our oneness with the planet, with each other, the atmosphere and the warmth of the sun that fills the atmosphere, the light of nature. We're feeling our oneness with each breath. And this morning, I invite you to focus on Unity's first principle. There is only one presence and one power, God the good, omnipotent. As you withdraw your attention from the realm of appearances and move inward to a consciousness of the presence of the divine in you. Focus on this truth statement, this first principle. There is only one presence and power in the universe and in my life, God the good, omnipotence. I invite you to silently repeat that statement. There is only one presence and one power in the universe and in my life, God the good, omnipotent. This means that your breath, the energy in your body, your very consciousness is the presence in you, as you, expressing through you, one presence, one power. There's no separation. In reality, we are one, one with the one with God, one with each other, and in fact, our oneness with God and with each other is all the same divine unity, the one presence and one power. Right now, those of us who are gathered here, not merely one in spirit, but one in reality. God being us. And everyone else in the whole world, whether they are praying now or not praying, we are one with the one. One presence, one power. God the good. As you feel your oneness, I invite you to be open to feeling the presence of good. What is that feeling? What is feeling good? Being conscious of the good as the only presence and power. As you are receptive to that feeling, allow awareness of the good in your life flow through your consciousness. Whatever you perceive as the good in your life, whatever forms that good takes, family and friends, supply, the life that is flowing through you, the energy that is flowing through you right now is the very presence of God the good. With clear and focused attention, feel and know the good that God is always here, now, in the midst of you and all around you. Feel the good. You do not need to define good in this moment. It's simply open to the experience, to the feeling, to the knowing. One presence, one power. Release all concerns. Release all thoughts, any challenges that may be happening in your experience. Be completely focused on the knowing and the feeling. Presence, divine good, here and now. If there's anyone you're praying with this morning, simply know that feeling, that good is there in the midst of them. You are one with them, and so you share this consciousness of the good by holding them in that light, holding them in the awareness. There's only one presence and one power in the universe and in your life. God the good, omnipotence. When we feel that good, we also experience the light, the warmth, gratitude, appreciation of rejoicing in the good. So we maintain this feeling, this awareness, this awareness of gratitude and joy of the presence of God the good. Hold to this now and each moment as we recall our true nature, Pray this in the consciousness of the Christ. So it is. Amen. Bring our attention back to the present moment, to our surroundings, to the realm of appearances. We maintain that consciousness of the presence of good. Everyone wants their good. We all want good health, good supply, a good life in a good society with a good government. We want to eat good food, listen to good music, watch good shows, have good friends. We, or at least most of us, also want to be good, to do good, to have a good reputation. And everyone wants to know how to get their good, their goods. We could put it in the plural. All these desires for goods, all the energy we devote to getting our good, drive us to think about what we think, about to do what we do. On the other hand, there are innumerable opinions about what is good and how to get it. Only a rare few have tried to answer the most important question. The most important question we can ask, the most important question to answer is, what is good? What do we mean when we call something good? If we do not know what is really good, how can we experience good? We need to understand the truth about good, what is really good. We can have and be good only when we understand what that means, what that is. I believe we intuitively know that good is real and that we can experience it, yet it is not so easy to discern what all good things have in common. Now, there is a clear and concise answer to this question. The story found in the Gospel of Mark. It's found in an exchange between an unnamed man and Jesus. The story briefly goes this way. As he was setting out on his journey, a man ran up and knelt before him and asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. No one is good but God alone." Of course, this answer still begs to be unpacked. If God alone is good, what does that imply about all the other things that we think of as good? And why does Jesus object to being called good? What is good? If only God is good, does that mean we are mistaken about everything else we regard as good? Is everything else not good? My thesis today is that we are relatively mistaken in our concepts of what things and acts are good, and that only the absolute reality is absolutely good. All other things can only be relatively good or bad. To illustrate the point, consider what we mean when we say the sentence, "This food is good." We might mean, "This food is delicious. It gives me pleasure." We might mean, "This food is nutritious. It is healthy." We might mean, "This food is still safe to eat," as we pull in a carton of milk out of the refrigerator and smell it to see if it's still good. It is possible that one person might find, might find a particular meal to be delicious, nutritious, and safe to eat. But another person might not find the food to be tasty. Yet another person might have allergies that make the food unsafe for them. It is just as possible that one might find a particular food is delicious, but not nutritious, or nutritious, but not delicious. It seems like the more I find out what's supposed to be good for me nutritionally, the more I find out that the stuff that I really like isn't. Setting that aside, though, when it comes to good food, there are no absolutes. Goodness is relative to individual tastes and needs. Okay. Now, if food can be only relatively good, it's easy to extrapolate to the relativity of other ideas of good. Political policies that some regard as good are almost always seen as bad by others. That's the source of political partisanship. In fact, policies that benefit some people almost always are detrimental to the interests of others. Likewise, there are differences of opinion about art, religion, fashion, and on and on. Now, I'd like to think that I am right in my opinions about food, politics, religion, and art, and that those who disagree are simply wrong. But when I put on my metaphysician hat and my mystic cloak, I recognize that the most I can reasonably assert is that my opinions are relatively more true than opposing opinions. And I am relatively certain that I am correct in that opinion. The best and most thorough case for the relativity of good and truth in human discourse was made by an early 20th century British philosopher named Francis Herbert Bradley. Now, you may or may not have heard of Bradley. He was a professor at Oxford and one of the most important and influential philosophers of his era. Now, his philosophical conclusions are basically the same at some points as the teachings of mysticism. And that's why I'm mentioning Bradley today and talking a little bit about him. That, and he's become one of my favorite philosophers. Now, we do not know if he had a mystical experience. Some have suggested that he may have. But he arrived at his conclusions by a careful analysis of the nature of language as related to reality. So his argument is pretty technical in relationship to logic and statements and propositions and words. But I'm not going to go into all of that. His philosophy, I mention it because his philosophy has a special relevance for us insofar as we see ourselves as modern day mystics. I want to point not to all the logic, which would actually take an entire course probably, we find in Bradley. But I do want to point out a few of his conclusions that, again, are especially relevant to the points that God alone is good, and that all other ideas of good and goods can at most be relatively true. So to begin with, Bradley made a distinction between absolute and relative truth. Absolute and relative truth. He wrote, all ideas in the end lack ultimate truth. They may be called working conceptions, good and true so far as they work. Because they work, and because nothing else could work so well, there is therefore nothing better and nothing truer than such ideas, each in its own proper place, since nothing else could possibly be more relative to our needs. So his perspective on truth was basically the same as that of American pragmatists such as William James. When an idea or method works for us, we call it truth until we find something that works better. Now, part of what Bradley's looking at here is a whole history of science, a whole history of philosophy, and the recognition that one paradigm may shift into another paradigm. One paradigm that worked for a time we let go of because we found a new one that works better. In both situations, the paradigms were thought of as truth, and yet they were relatively true. And Bradley Bradley commented on the probability that science will change as we discover more and more things that work better than our old ways of thinking. Now, there is more to Bradley's discussion of why concepts are incomplete abstractions from experience. But for our purposes, the important point is the distinction between the relative and the absolute. The relativity of truth would include, of course, human concepts of good. We can make only relatively true statements about what is good, statements that work for our needs. On the other hand, there are things that can be affirmed about the nature of the absolute reality and consequently about the nature of the absolute good. So this is where Bradley goes into the idea of the absolute that cannot quite be stated, and yet there's some things that we can say about it which explain why we can't completely state that truth. Bradley wrote that reality is one in this sense that it has a positive nature exclusive of discord, a nature which must hold throughout everything that is to be real. So the absolute reality, we can say this about it, according to Bradley, that it is one, that it is a unified whole, that it is all encompassing, and it is entirely harmonious. To that thought for a moment, the ultimate reality, the absolute reality, must be a unity, a wholeness, and a harmony that is present with and in everything. Bradley contended that appearance is connected to and derived from reality. Nevertheless, the nature of appearance is that it is not what it seems. He wrote that appearance must belong to reality, and it must therefore be concordant and other than it seems. Because, of course, sometimes it doesn't appear to be concordant. It doesn't appear to be harmonious. That's the nature, he's saying, of appearances, but not of reality. He goes on to say that the real is individual, which, of course, it is one, he says, in the sense that its positive character embraces all differences in an inclusive harmony. So part of another way of putting this is that the absolute reality is the entire cosmos, perceived or unperceived, right? The appearances, our experiences, our judgments, our abstractions, partial extractions from that whole, that unified whole, which must be in its fundamental nature harmonious. It embraces and encompasses and it harmonizes all things. This is the perspective that Bradley is putting out. This is perspective that we find in the writings of the mystics. Now, finally, Bradley made a case for idealist metaphysics. Okay? The theory that reality is mind, not matter. So idealism in metaphysics is in opposition to, for example, dualism or materialism, that ultimately concludes that all reality is mind. So that's another thing that we can say, or Bradley would say, about ultimate reality. The idealist theory of reality has been held by great philosophers throughout history. In India, from the time of the Upanishads, and in the West, from Pythagoras and Plato, up to modern philosophers like Bradley and his successors, and even physicists. And of course, you understand that unity metaphysics is idealist in just the same sense. Reality ultimately is mind. Now, Bradley used the term psychical phenomena for the mind stuff of reality. Psychical phenomena. Okay, so in other words, the happening in our psyche, in our consciousness. He wrote, feeling, thought, and volition, any groups under which we class psychical phenomena, are all the material of existence. There is no other material, actual or even possible. So his basic point, conclusion, is that there's no possibility of there being anything other than this psychical phenomenon, this experience of mind that we have in terms of our feelings, our thoughts, our will, and so on. Now, regarding the nature of good, Bradley wrote a book on ethics, and that book sorts through the prominent theories, prominent ethical theories in religion and philosophy, and shows them all to be relatively useful, but also deficient in some way. Now, ethics is about the good. What is the nature of the good? And of course, more in a more focused way about how can we do good? How can we be good? How can we do right? And so on. Now, I have taught ethics theory for 4 decades at various times and have arrived at basically the same conclusion Bradley did. Maybe that's one of the reasons I like him. I read it and said, oh, that's what I've been thinking. None of the ethics theories proposed in the histories of religion and philosophy are entirely adequate, yet all of them contain some useful insights. So just for a few examples of the types of theories that have, I want to say, relatively true ideas of good. One is that the good is that which makes us happy. This idea of happiness as the good has been at the root of a lot of philosophy from the time of the Socrates and the ancient Greeks. Now, if we consider the meaning of this, the good is that which makes us happy, we could recognize that some people derive pleasure and happiness from inflicting suffering on others. Therefore, we might have to conclude from the theory of good is what makes us happy that inflicting suffering is good. No spiritual or reasonable person would accept this conclusion. So in a lot of cases, we might say, well, yes, the good makes us happy, but it may not be the case that everything that makes us happy is truly good. Another kind of theory is that the good is that which is useful for us. Now, again, what are the implications of this? In a lot of cases, that's true. We say something's good because it's useful. But you might think of an example that sometimes telling lies is useful for self-protection. Therefore, we would conclude from this theory, when a lawbreaker lies for self-protection, that is good. Now, of course, no spiritual or reasonable person would accept that conclusion, even though we might think of the good a lot of times as that which is useful. Okay, so relatively true, but also relatively false. Another type of theory is a golden rule theory. It's the kind of theory that Kant held to and a lot of religions hold to, of course. And the golden rule is a wonderful generalization of guidance. The challenge with the golden rule is that no matter how we state it, it is fundamentally individualistic and subjective. So, stating the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Again, a good general rule. But suppose I say, well, what I want people to do is to give me millions of dollars, which means, according to the golden rule, I ought to give millions of dollars to others. Problem is, I don't have millions of dollars to give to others. And so that's kind of an example of where it, it's a little bit challenging to apply it when we really think about it, what we really would like to have others do to us, and then try to, reciprocate or initiate that flow. Now, also, sometimes how you want to be treated is not how others want to be treated. So, for example, a man might want a woman to grab him and kiss him, but that does not mean that she would want him to grab her and kiss her. You see, as George Bernard Shaw said, do not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Their tastes might be different. So that's the sort of subjective nature of the golden rule. It's a good general rule, but it's not kind of an exact or an absolute description of the good and doing the good. And one final theory is that the good is doing God's will. Well, I agree with that in principle, of course, but the concept is also incomplete. Because even though most religious people might agree that God's will is good, we know and see that different religions and different people have contradictory ideas about it, what it means to do God's will. It's sort of the nature of some of the fundamental differences among religions. What is God's will? Now, if only God, the absolute reality, if only God is absolutely real, then the absolute good that God is an indefinable, indescribable absolute reality, equivalent to the indefinable absolute reality, also known as God. The absolute is equivalent to the mystic's God, the God that can be experienced but not fully and adequately described. See, that's where the relativity comes in. That's why Jesus said, God alone is good. He didn't even want people to call him good because he recognized, well, I'm projecting here a little bit, but Jesus recognized the relativity of this notion of good as it would be applied to him or anyone else. So he insisted God alone is good. So the closest we can get to the reality of good is by contemplation of ideas that are come closest to describing the absolute good. And this again is consistent with the mystical tradition. And so we find in the mystical tradition this notion that there are ideas that we can contemplate to arrive at the experience of the divine, of the ultimate reality. We can use these ideas to sort of climb Jacob's ladder to ascend and experience the divine. But the ideas, of course, themselves are, again, we might say, relative. So the Platonic tradition of divine ideas emanating from the absolute is expressed in different, various, slightly different terms in the Jewish Kabbalah, in the Eastern Christian tradition, and in Sufi mysticism. The Hindu mysticism also has a similar tradition. There are ideas that come close to or bring us closer to the realization and experience of the absolute good. Divine ideas are also sometimes referred to as the essences of things or the energies of God. These are common sorts of concepts that we find in the theories of mystics, these ideas or energies that bring us closer to God as we contemplate them, as we experience them. So mystics agree that contemplating divine ideas opens the way for the experience of God, the experience of ultimate reality that cannot be fully described. The theory of an eternal realm of true forms, as proposed by Socrates and has been carried throughout this Christian mysticism anyway, includes the notion that there are eternal perfect forms of objects and qualities. An implication of the theory is that your real self, my real self, your real self is a perfect, harmonious, eternal idea. That's your real self. And your apparent self in this theory is a temporary imitation or shadow of that true and perfect self. And so this would apply not only to you as an individual human being, that your true self is perfect and harmonious and eternal. It would also apply to other people, but also cats, dogs, animals, all would have the reality of all of them would be perfect eternal ideas. This is why it's just as possible to do a metaphysical treatment for an animal, for a pet, as it is for a human being. We go to this notion of the eternal perfect idea that is the reality of whoever or whatever we're praying for. Now, the divine idea of the beautiful should be mentioned here too, because it is another idea that's regarded as close to the good. In fact, in Platonic and Sufi mysticism, the beautiful is understood to be synonymous with the good. So one may contemplate the beautiful to arrive at a consciousness of the good. And there are, again, other ideas that we find in these traditions, the ideas of wisdom, virtue, justice, piety, courage, love, and even temperance or moderation. That was a big idea for the Greeks. All of these are ideas of the good that one might say emanate from the one or are contained within the one. Now, we have already noted that the word that best described the absolute as envisioned by Bradley and actually also by most mystics are these words: unity, wholeness, harmony. Unity, wholeness, harmony. So anything less than unity, anything less than wholeness, anything less than harmony can only be a relative appearance and not an ultimate reality. Bradley's ideas regarding the absolute reality and relative appearances are reflected in a key concept of unity and the other metaphysical healing teachings. Now, there does not appear to be any definite derivation or connection between Bradley and the early New Thought writers. Their ideas seem to emerge independently at about the same time. All we can say is that great minds think alike. One point of Bradley's philosophy can be expressed simply and bluntly: we have been deceived by appearances. The remedy for that was stated long ago by Jesus, also simply and bluntly. Do not judge by appearances, but judge right judgment. In other words, do not identify with relative appearances. Do not identify with relative appearances. Identify only with the absolute. This theory of the absolute reality and relatively unreal appearances can be applied for healing the body or practically any other human challenge. And so the sort of seemingly abstract philosophy of Bradley basically is consistent with this metaphysical teaching about healing. So another thing we can say is that all things that are appearances nevertheless embody godlike qualities to some degree. That is their relative reality. Objects or forms of any kind we might regard as temporary, finite embodiments of godlike qualities, even as a shadow looks like the person that's, for example, casting the shadow. So people, animals, and conditions are relatively real and relatively good. Real and good to the extent that they embody godlike qualities. Things and conditions are unreal and not good, if I could put that in air quotes, unreal and not good to the degree that they do not embody godlike qualities. So unity, wholeness, and harmony are absolute reality, meaning the appearances of division, illness, and discord are relatively unreal appearances. Perfection is reality, imperfection, a relatively unreal appearance. So when you look in the mirror and you think you see imperfection, realize that you are seeing an unreal imitation of the truth, that you are expression of, the presence of the beautiful. What we judge to be bad or evil are actually relative deficiencies of the good in some appearance. In effect, deficiencies are insubstantial nothingness. So in reality, bad or evil are insubstantial nothingness. And that's why when you study lessons in truth and you get to the denials, you might ponder that a little bit in terms of that relationship between appearances and ultimate reality, which is, again, the ultimate reality is the whole. So the metaphysical treatments that are used in Unity, New Thought, and Christian Science reflect the distinction between the absolute and the relative. Such treatments affirm identification with the absolute reality, God the good, and deny or detach from the relative appearances. When we think or say, I am this or I'm that, we are identifying with the this and the that. Almost all statements of identification made by humans express appearances rather than reality. We attach our I am, as we say, to these relative statements or relative ideas that are not the absolute truth. So when we attach our I am to gender, temporary conditions, ethnicity, nationality, religion, or any other limiting factors, we are identifying with relatively unreal appearances. So if I describe myself as male, old, Euro-American, or sick, I am identifying with partial, relatively unreal appearances. Likewise, if I identify others regarding gender, ethnicity, or any other partial qualities, I am judging by appearances. The closest I can get to identifying with the absolute reality of what I am is to attach my I am to identify with the absolute reality. So when I think I am one with absolute reality and absolute good, I am one with God, I am making a statement close to the absolute truth, close to the reality. We can also identify with the qualities of the absolute. So I am one with divine unity, wholeness, and harmony. Another side to metaphysical treatment is to disidentify from the relatively unreal appearances. So these are affirmations and denials. So division, separation, discord, and illness are mere appearances. They have no power. They have ultimately no absolute reality. Such conditions are possible to change when we disidentify from them, when we detach our consciousness from the appearances and attach our consciousness and our identity to the absolute, which is absolute good. This is the basis of and the principle of formation of the original method in metaphysical teachings of affirmations and denials. We have turned affirmations into sort of self-help concepts about our qualities. But originally, when you look at Lessons of Truth, when you look at Christian healing, for example, originally they were metaphysical statements about contrasting the absolute with the relative. Metaphysical treatment, then, was originally and is a transformation of consciousness, a transformation from the deception of appearances to the realization of the divine here and now. Reality is perfectly divine. Anything less is mere appearance. So treatment for others, humans, animals, plants, involves recognizing their unity with the absolute. Their perfectly divine nature does not depend on the consciousness of the animal or the plant. It depends on the consciousness of the truth. Behold the presence of divine harmony, and it will become apparent. The presence and reality of divine harmony become apparent when we focus on the absolute. So the most important question of the title of this talk, the most important question is simply, what is good? And the answer, the simple answer, God alone is good. Absolute reality is absolute good. One of the most important discoveries of the modern era, I would say, is that by mentally identifying with God the good, the absolute reality, and by disidentifying from appearances, healing and harmonization happens. We identify the I am with the absolute. When we identify with the absolute, disidentify from relative appearances, healing and harmonization happens. The metaphysical teachings spread throughout the world precisely because this worked. Okay? Knowing the truth produced remarkable healings. That's the historical fact of how unity, New Thought, Christian Science spread throughout the world. People discovered that it worked when they tried it, when they were diligent in working with the principles. Because the deception of appearances has become deeply rooted in collective consciousness, we who have some understanding, some knowing of the truth, we must persistently be mindful in holding to the absolute in every day, in every moment when a challenge comes up. We shift our consciousness from the relative appearances to the absolute truth. Do this persistently. By doing so, we make the real apparent. We bring reality into appearances. So do not be discouraged by the ignorant skepticism of the world. Do not be discouraged if the truth does not appear quickly. Absolute reality is always absolute good, whether or not it is apparent to us in any moment. Whether or not it is apparent to us in any moment. We are one with God, the absolute reality and absolute good. That has to be the truth. Hold to the truth, and the truth will appear. As Jesus said, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So I set you free now to experience the absolute good in your life. Thank you.